Accurascale. As modellers, that name excites us. Since they started in 2016, they've hit the ground running. In 2018, they announced the new Deltic, followed by Mark V coaches and a Class 92. Late in 2019, they took us by surprise by announcing an all-new Class 37. Here we have a manufacturer not scared to make an impact, a statement to take on a challenge. So back in 2019, when an email landed on my desk asking if I'd like to join the team at Accurascale for their latest locomotive scanning, I jumped at the chance, as you can well imagine. The meeting place was Didcot Parkway Station, and my mind went into overdrive thinking what they could possibly be scanning. A Class 70, a 56, or even a 66? No, surely not. This company not scared to create what they want, what us modellers had suggested to them. Didcot Parkway is next to Didcot Railway Centre, a former Great Western engine shed. But that would mean Accurascale doing a steam engine, their first steam engine. But which steam engine? Let's find out.
Hi, my name is Fran Burke and I am the PR and Marketing Director of Accurascale.
And my name is Gareth Bear. I'm the Senior Project Manager, and this is my project.
And we're here today at the Didcot Railway Centre to look at Cook Manor, our first Accurascale steam locomotive project.
Yeah, this is sounding like a palate cleanser for me after the Class 37.
Yeah, we were very cruel to Gareth. What we decided to do was he got to do 37, something he was very passionate about, and then we said, well, I mean, we can do the Class 37, but you have to do a steam locomotive to go with it as well, which is a whole new territory for yourself.
Actually, it's really exciting. This is my first steam locomotive I've ever designed, and actually I've kind of eased myself in with something which maybe isn't the most complicated project we could have started with. So
no, it was one that was certainly very much demanded in the customer survey we done over the summer. And we wanted to look for a valid steam project, and we do have interest in steam as well as diesels. We tend to get associated with kind of more modern era projects such as diesels and today's railways, but we decided we want to offer Accurascale models for all different areas of the hobby, and we're working our way through that. So
yeah.
We wanted to do something nice and pretty, and I think the Manor class really covers that in the steam era locomotives.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's beautiful lines on this locomotive. I think I've taken a real shine to it, actually.
Absolutely, yeah, me too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I think it's, you probably argue it's the forgotten Great Western 460. Really.
I think
it was made a long time ago, obviously by another manufacturer, but
yeah.
I think it's definitely long past time someone had a real crack at it and tried to bring it up to the latest standards.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah, and that's something that we identified too, and we really are aiming now to do justice to the design and
absolutely,
yeah, do a really nice locomotive. And it's really going to be, we're going to do our own signature stamp on steam, and really try and introduce some new revolutionary features into that too, that we will kind of explain more as we go along. But today was our initial survey. And yeah, we're delighted obviously to bring Hornby Magazine along for the adventure and talk Hornby Magazine through the whole process of design of a new locomotive project from start to finish.
That's right, yeah.
Well, it's a Great Western Manor class loco, 7800 series. They were first built in the late 1930s, and the Great Western Railway Operating Department wanted a more powerful locomotive to replace their 260s in the 4300, 6300 series, and they wanted a 460. The Great Western had gone in for 460s before the Great War, but they had been express engines. When Collett arrived, he put smaller driving wheels on the Saint class to make the Hall class, and they were successful. But they wanted something that was a bit more flexible. So the next step was to produce the Grange class, which had smaller driving wheels than the Hall, and in some respects looked like a Manor but had a bigger boiler. And that in fact was a reincarnation of one of Mr. Churchward's original standardisation scheme ideas, but one that was never built. That appeared first in the 30s, and the next one that came along was the Manor. The Manor had a completely new boiler, a much smaller and lighter design of boiler, to enable it to be used on routes with a greater restriction on the weight of locomotives. So the Manor fell into what Great Western called the blue category for route availability, lighter than the red category of the Halls and the Granges. They initially came to work on express trains, a very peculiar express train, which ran between Newcastle and Barry. And that was mainly to enable seamen to get from one end to the other, to move from port to port. And that went over various Great Western cross-country lines, most of which are now long vanished. So that was how they started. After that, they were also used as assisting engines, often called banking engines, in the west of England on the steep gradients, where they replaced older 440s. Initial batch of 20 were built, followed later on into BR days by a final batch of 10. They really got to probably the greatest fame of all when they moved into North Wales and appeared on the Cambrian line, which is where most people, certainly many people of my age, will remember them hauling the Cambrian Coast Express. Beautiful green livery, not Great Western green, but fully lined BR livery, always beautifully looked after and well turned out. White paint on the buffers, white paint on the smoke box door, on the hinges and handles. The Cambrian Coast headboard, and running with chocolate and cream coaches. Marvellous sight, wonderful thing to travel behind. And then in later years, some of them, such as Cookham, were sent elsewhere to see out their mileage. So you have one or two finished up at places like Reading, where they worked literally as what was called the pilot. Now the pilot did shunting, but the pilot was also there to take over from failed engines on mainline trains. And of course there were a lot of early diesels about then, plus new diesels all the time, and they were rather inclined to fail. So you would get something like Cookham Manor setting off from Reading to Paddington with a diesel and a train behind the diesel and still running it at 60 miles an hour. One of the big problems with assisting failed diesels was that coal was inclined to fall off the tender going fast. So there was an alteration to the instructions, and the steam engine had to be put inside the diesel if they were just being put on the train to provide steam heat, because the diesel's boilers were even less reliable than the rest of the diesels. So you would find a Manor going up from Reading to Paddington, coupled inside a diesel which could still run at full power but couldn't provide any steam heat. And the Manor would be duly taken up to all sorts of speeds, probably 80-90 miles an hour, with the crew hanging on for dear life but still supplying heat to keep the passengers warm. Now it's interesting, in 1985, the first big train that we ran for 1985 for Great Western 150 was down to Plymouth, and we used a King class and a Manor on it, double heading. But unfortunately the King failed at Taunton with a hot axle box and had to be taken off. So we were left then with a Manor on the front of the train. And as we went westwards from there, we ran parallel to a stretch of the M5. And there were cars on the M5 with people looking out of the sunshine roofs, filming the train as we went along, trying desperately to keep up with us, because the Manor was getting along at, we'll call, a fair old pace. What people didn't realise was that there were two Class 37 diesels on the back pushing. So there we are. And here we have now Cookham, one of a number of preserved Manors, although Cookham hasn't done much work for a very long time, and at the moment is really totally inoperable. But it's probably in nearest to as withdrawn BR condition, which is why it's important for Accurascale to come here and look at it and take details of it to produce a really cracking model.
Today we're scanning this locomotive. We're using the Artec Array large volume scanner. To capture the locomotive, we position the scanner in various positions around the locomotive, capturing what we can see from each position. That allows us to create an overlap and align the images together based on what the scanner can see from each position. So we start off at head height and move around, and then we move up on a large mast that we're able to capture the roof and any upper detail that we need really. We'll then take all of that point cloud information once it's aligned and process it through to what we call an STL mesh. A mesh is a universal format that most people can read, and then for any downstream process it's ready. So today we've been on site around 4 to 5 hours, and we've probably got a similar amount of time back at base to process all the data together, so around 10 hours in total. When we're scanning we need a nice level light, and we can't scan in the rain. Scanning in night is an option, but tripping over things isn't always good. So a nice even light level, and we're able to capture all the surfaces that we see. Any shiny surfaces we do struggle with, but we've worked out ways to get around that so we can get a complete image today.
This CAD file shows the Great Western Railway version of the locomotive. As delivered, they developed a bit of a reputation as poor steamers, and with the outbreak of the Second World War there was no opportunity to correct the issues. This wasn't solved until 1952, which means that the 10 additional manners built by British Railways in 1950 also suffered the same problem. A rare black mark on Collett's record. Happily, the redrafted engines were fantastic and proved to be more than capable performers. This exploded view illustrates the number of parts involved in this project. We were quite pleased that the original 1938 and 1952 works drawings that we acquired with the assistance of the GWS at Didcot matched the 3D scan data perfectly. Not bad for a locomotive approaching 75 years of age. The key components to note are the frame and boiler, which are both made from die-cast metal. This means that the model without tender tips the scales at 300 grams or 2/3 of a pound. The use of a 3D scan means capturing the complex shape of the boiler, especially around the firebox, becomes much easier. Rather than interpolating 2D works drawings, our CAD designer is able to snap the shape to the real thing while comparing the 2D data in the plan view to make sure that everything reconciles nicely. Our manor employs a very smooth running 3-pole motor with a low starting voltage. It drives the rear axle of the locomotive only, which obviously moves the rest of the wheels via the coupling rods. Arranging the motor in this way has enabled us to fit in as much detail as we can between the frames, although my original dreams of having this whole area open like the real thing were quickly dashed on the rocks of reality when CAD design started. The cab backhead is an area that we were keen on packing as much separate detail in as possible. I'm particularly proud of the detail on the back of the windows, which will be picked out in brass of course, as well as the ATC equipment and the various levers and handles on the floor. Notice also the clear plastic part inside the firebox, which will facilitate the typical glow of fire, which will be synced with the sound on DCC locomotives. The inner end of the locomotive is often fairly plain on model locomotives, so I made an effort to make sure that all rivets and panel lines were in place just to set us apart. You won't really be able to see this when the tender is connected, but we'll know it's there. Of course, a full set of sandboxes is installed, along with as much pipework behind the cab steps as we could realistically pack in. We're somewhat fortunate that the Great Western was a huge fan of Stephenson's valve gear. We have quite a few steam locomotives in the pipeline, and it's nice to ease ourselves in with what is a relatively simple design of linkages. Although that shouldn't disguise it, it's still a challenge to accurately represent any form of valve gear in these small scales, with several compromises required to make everything work reliably. By hiding the boiler, you can see the detail we've squeezed in between the frames. This includes a vacuum cylinder and various linkages in motion that is hidden from most normal viewing angles. We were very fortunate to have the assistance of the guys at the Earlstoke Manor Fund, who allowed us access to the locomotives currently undergoing rebuild and repair at Tyseley Locomotive Works. In particular, 7812 was basically just frames and cab shell, allowing us excellent access to an area normally extremely difficult to access. Note also the Sugar Cube speaker directly under the chimney. This will be partnered with a pair of speakers in the tender to provide a powerful high quality sound despite the small size of the locomotive. Looking at the front of the locomotive, you can see that we've made a couple of styles of smoke bark start to provide variety. There will also be a dummy screw coupling provided in a bag for customers to install. However, my favourite detail is the dummy front of the pony track that will hide the NEM coupler pocket and create an accurate appearance for this area of the locomotive. There is almost nothing worse than seeing a gorgeously detailed and weathered model and seeing a huge rectangular hole in the front truck. We also included a couple of little parts to install on the front of the cylinders. To enable the model to safely negotiate second radius curves, we've had to remove a little section from the front of these. If you're working with closer to scale curves or just want a manor for display, then we've got you covered here. Finally, looking at the driver's side, you can see the original oil field arrangement fitted to locomotives from new, as well as the reversing lever and vacuum pump on this side. The latter is missing from the real-life Cook and Manor. Fortunately, several other locomotives at Didcot did have this feature, so we were able to measure these to compare with our works drawings. Compared to the 3D scan data we shared earlier, the CAD image shows a radically different set of options. Although it's still a Churchwood 3500 gallon design, this version features riveted tender sides as opposed to flush, and a narrow style of horn box rather than those with a 45-degree angled side as found on Cook and Manor's tender. We can mix and match these as appropriate, of course. We've also included the strengthened style of narrow frame in our tooling suite, although no locomotives in the first run include this particular option. Removing the tender body and colos shows the location of the PCB and decoder. There are actually two decoders overlaid in this view, illustrating both the standard size ESU Locksound V5 and the micro version. Hidden beneath the PCB are a pair of sugar cube speakers that will port their sound down through the holes in the base of the tender. At the rear of the locomotive, the CAD shows the early tapered style of buffer. Other options include later tapered style without the thin, straight section and the final parallel buffer that is common from the late GWR and most of the British Railways era. Also of note are the screw coupling and steam heat pipe. Both of these will be customer installed parts, as when fitted they will foul the NEM coupler. The springs and axle boxes are a separate part, and we're making two versions of these depending on the style of frame. It wasn't strictly necessary to make these separate parts, but we wanted to have round spring handles that would be impossible otherwise due to tooling restrictions. Looking underneath, you can see the water scoop vacuum and steam pipes, as well as all the brake linkages. At the inner end of the tender, there is a lot of separate detail. We surveyed around 8 different tenders, including examples at Tyseley, Didcot and Toddington, before settling on the exact configuration for our model. This particular version includes the frame over the toolboxes. This was fitted in the 1960s to quite a few examples, and its sole purpose was to carry an overhead warning label to act as a reminder to the firemen not to climb on the coal load in electrified areas.
We're lucky to have the likes of Mike Romans and Bob there at Tyseley as well, who's really helped us out with researching this project.
Absolutely, yeah. The Great Western Society have been a great help here, but yeah, we're obviously we've become quite good friends with the Earlstoke Manor Fund, and we're starting to get feelers out to the other groups as well. I think by the end of it, we're going to be good friends with all of the owners of the 9 surviving manors.
Absolutely, and to be fantastically with their enthusiasm and really helpful.
Oh yeah,
too.
I mean,
the
guys have been a great help so far, and we're pretty confident that we're going to be making a cracking model.
Absolutely, and hopefully this steam locomotive goes very well for us, and then we'll be able to broaden our steam range and offer to other aspects of other regions and all that kind of stuff too. We're going to look at as we go forward.
Absolutely, yeah. I think they've got me set for another few steam locomotives yet after this.
Absolutely, we've lined you up for all sorts of interesting projects, and it's all part of getting Accurascale's range to other modelers who we haven't offered to previously. So we're really looking forward to having their feedback on our models too.
Yeah, but let me do a diesel next after this.
We'll think about it. We'll think about it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.